me start off with this because I like to kind of lead the way and preface something to lay a foundation for this next topic.
Right.
When I was in high school, I used to take a lot of pharmaceuticals. That was my drug of choice, like Xanax, Vicodin. That's what I was dabbling in back then. I don't know if anybody out there has ever taken Xanax, or maybe you have, but you kind of lose like your inhibitions. And I was often would steal things. Okay, so
Okay.
now I was at the mall with my high school sweetheart. Okay, and I was on Xanax, typical thing, and it was our anniversary, and she was picking out some jewelry that she wanted, and she's like, "I like that," and I was like, "I'm gonna get this for you," and she walked off, and I stole it. Okay, I stole the jewelry, acted like I bought it, and was giving her a gift for her anniversary. We're there together. She puts it on as we're walking out of the mall. The siren goes off, and the cops stop us and arrest me for stealing. And she finds out that I stole the gift that was for her. On the you see this how this is developing, and she got very
Yeah.
upset. Okay, I was embarrassed that really the next day when I was kind of came out of my drug induced Xanax fate, induced how I was acting. But after that happened, I got really embarrassed and ashamed, was shameful for my behavior because I did something that was unethical, right? And that now I did something that made me feel ashamed and embarrassed for my behavior the next day. When we talk
Right.
about sexual abuse, childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences, it's often associated with the child or the person developing shame within themselves throughout their life. But when
Yeah.
I look at that, see, I was ashamed because I did something intentionally and I got caught. Why would someone who experiences abuse or sexual something done to them make them feel ashamed? You see the difference?
Yeah. Well, with abuse, we were. Like for me, I was ashamed because I felt like I did something to cause all of it. What could I have done better? You know, how could I have been a better daughter? How could I have been a better sister? You know, and it just seemed like I could never get anything right, and everything, got worse and worse and worse. And as a result, I felt ashamed of myself that I couldn't get it right because I figured if I got it right, then everything would stop. But nothing, I could never get anything right, and it just got worse. The abuse got more concentrated, I guess you could say. It seemed like it doubled up. The abuse doubled up, you know. But another thing about, shame and abuse is that, within Hispanic families, you're shamed into keeping everything quiet. If you were a good girl, you won't talk about this,
Mm.
you know. Um, and that's always pressed upon you all the time. If you were good, then you won't talk about this. And I myself didn't have that. Um, in fact, I got the exact opposite. It wasn't a matter of if you're a good girl, you know, everything will stop. No, mine is if you tell anybody, I'll kill you, your mother, and your brother. And he meant it. That was my father.
And you'd be ostracized within the family? Like,
I never said anything because the look on my father's face when he said if I told anybody what was going on. Okay, you know how parents tell children things to scare them good, to straighten out? Okay? No. The look in his eyes was pure evil, and he meant it. He meant it. He meant every word he said because Um, I've had 3 strokes in my early 40s, and that's the one look I have never forgotten. That look he gave me when I was a little girl, and um, he scared me quiet. He scared me quiet. I never said anything about it until I remembered in my early 30s.
Okay, so that's a fear. You were scared. That's a little different than shame, though, right? Because you
Yeah,
act.
the shame thing is in Hispanic families, you feel ashamed that you can't do right. You feel ashamed that you can't be the good girl or the good boy, which is typical in Hispanic families. They'll shame you and you're not their concept of what you should be. Okay. And they'll keep it up and keep it up and keep it up until you be what they want you to be, you know. Um, like I said, I didn't experience much of that, but I did see a lot of that um, amongst the boys in the family. The boys, get shamed into needing to be the father's image. You know, be you need to be exactly like your dad, and if you don't, they just shame you to constantly telling you how worthless you are, and you just you're not worthy of the family name. And in Hispanic families, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. If you're not worthy of the family name, why go on?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
that the shaming thing is different for the boys than it is for the girls. It's not universal.
right. The so I guess you really lose your any sense of identity, what you're saying at a much earlier age, because you're like almost forced into a concept that you might not be aligned with. Obviously, spiritually,
Yeah,
like intuitively, you realize that sexual abuse is wrong. But at the same time, it's like, I need to be a good girl and keep this quiet because that's what good girls do. Yeah, I could see how the partition of the mind just fractures. And then you, yeah, can you go into any of that about how you, as you started to discover it in your 30s, of just like, and try to piece that whole situation together?
and in my 30s, what came was fragments. They were like loose jigsaw pieces of a puzzle. Okay, you'd see the puzzle piece and you look at it and go, "That's interesting," but I have no idea what that belongs to. So what I was getting was these little loose puzzle pieces that none of them interconnected at all. It was a 5-second video
Mm.
that popped, and it didn't take a rocket scientist to know what was going on. And of all the things that my mind decides to give back to me, I wish to God that wasn't one of them, because now I can't get rid of it. No matter how hard I try to get rid of that 5-second video from my childhood, and I can't do it.
Mm.
And what it was is, um, I can see, I'm looking at the ceiling in my bedroom, okay, and I see my dad sliding up and down on top of me, and I've got my arms crossed like this across my chest, protecting my upper chest and my neck. And it lasted for about 5 seconds. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know what he was actually doing at that time. And it also explains why 5 years into my marriage, I slept like this, protecting myself with my arms crossed. I did that because I didn't want my father touching my skin. Okay. So I would cross my arms on my upper part of my chest and around my neck. So,
With your
he wouldn't
husband,
be
though,
on.
you're talking about because when your husband.
But with my husband, yeah, I didn't. The first 5 years of our marriage, I slept like that. It wasn't until I finally started to trust my husband that I stopped to slowly stop doing that.
Okay, so now this is again, like I'm going to ask questions. Things might get personal. You say, yes, I'm willing to
No,
talk. Okay. How
no,
did,
everything,
I love it. I love how open you are. Remember, we're here to uplift the human condition, help heal and
yeah,
transcend generational patterns
I
of it.
got nothing. I
Thank,
got nothing done.
thank you.
Nothing.
And remember, same thing. You got any questions for me? I'll come out with it. That's why I lead with that
I'll
first
do that
story.
on camera.
Okay, thanks. Right. The so how did the your sexual relations with your husband did that obviously was that affected because of the childhood stuff? Like
Was
was he aware of it earlier on before y'all got married? Did you tell him about that or just go into any of that?
I told him snippets of it, what I could remember. I told him what I could remember, and what little I could remember. I told him about it, and he um, didn't like the fact that my father had spent his whole life destroying me and trying to keep me destroyed. You see, when I was a kid, my mother, anytime my mother would do something for my father, he would break something that she treasured and highly regarded. Well, when there was nothing left to break, guess what? There was one thing left to break, and that was me. And he broke me all the way down to the point that it affected me for 40 years.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
I'm sure the sexual abuse by your parent. I can't think of anything more damaging, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, anything. Um,
no, he meant to destroy me all the way around. You know, by the time I was, I don't know, I want to say that by the time I was 10, I didn't know who I was. You know, I had no virginity, I had no identity, I had no self esteem. I mean, he took it all away from me, and I was destroyed completely by the time I was 10. You
right.
know, I was more like surviving and not thriving. Big
Yeah,
difference.
there's so many. My mind is racing, and there's so many different angles I can go into this. Like,
Go any way you want.
okay, so I'm thinking I'm putting myself in a situation where I'm falling in love with a woman, right? And then she went through childhood abuse and and so I'm going to explain kind of from a man's perspective who's falling in love with a woman, right? Who's keeping it secret that she had childhood abuse. I can see why a woman maybe would not want to tell their lover about this because from my perspective I would be like I'm supposed to be like friends with your father, right? I'm your going to be your husband. I have to like
Right.
respect your father and then on top of it your father was uh, uh, broke your virginity and then that concept in my mind and I'm like trying to like process this while I'm like trying to connect and fall in love with someone like that is such
Yeah.
a unique dynamic that I can really understand why women would not want to tell a lover and then at the same time what is going on with the man's through the man's mind is that was that partly why you didn't tell him or you just you didn't understand or you didn't know really everything that happened and you didn't want him to know about it talk about that.
Um, I had no problems telling him what went on back then. My problem was he wanted to know specifics, and I couldn't remember them. You know, I tried to explain to him that what information I had were these little puzzle pieces. Okay, and that's all I owned. That's all I possessed in my head, and he didn't understand that. You know, to him, he was like, "No, there's got to be more. There's got to be more," and I'm like, yeah, there probably is, and I'm sure there is more. Unfortunately, my brain did not unlock the more. You know, it just pretty basically said, "Here you go," dumped it in my lap, and walked away. You know, it's like you going on a jigsaw puzzle piece hunt because you've lost them, and you've lost like say 12 pieces, and you think, okay, to keep track of these, I'm going to put them in a bag. Okay, so I don't lose them. Well, that's what happened when my brain dumped those separate memories. It was like undumping that 12-piece puzzle piece bag, the pieces that you found, and dropped it in my lap and said goodbye, and basically saying deal with that. And I didn't know how to deal with that because all the jigsaw pieces of the memories, none of them connected. I didn't know what they belonged to. They were like snapshots in time. I didn't know where they belonged to. Where was I? What was going on with my life at the time? Was I with mom? Was I with dad? Was mom and dad separated at that point in these puzzle pieces? What was going on? Because I don't know. And he wanted to know all the details. I couldn't give it to him. So he thought I was withholding from him. And it's like, I'm not withholding anything from you. It's my head.
One of the things that I have seen, it's an observation, is those who have talked about like childhood trauma and sexual abuse, you'll see like two things. One is either they're like super protective, like their protection system, and the other side is that they're almost hypersexual, like a hyper arousal, where they're like you look in a lot of the sex addiction and pornography, and they do interviews on some of these women. A lot of them were abused as a child, and it fractured them, and they kind of like anchored in that persona of their sexuality. Was there ever a time in your life where you were like hypersexual, like those type of events, or explain anything on that level, or was it all more protection system?
It was a protection system up until I was probably about 14. And then the hormones came into play. Okay. And then it was like, but it was twofold on that. First, it was sexual, hypersexual, like you said, is increased sex drive. But the other part, I realized many years later, half of it was an active sex drive. The other half was wanting to gain validation from a male figure because I never got it as a child. And I put the two together. Every time I would go find, I call it a relationship, you know.
Sex was your validation, right? That became what you connected as this is what gives me value or meaning.
Yeah, this is what gives me value, give me meaning, because I get the attention and the affections of a male figure, which I didn't get as a child. So in a sense, I was searching. I was searching for the right validation, and then I never got it, but I settled for whatever I got as a form of something. However minute it was, at least it was a valid form of something.
Oh, okay. And then as you start creating that pattern of behavior, then it gets reinforced of, hey, I can keep doing this, and this is how I can reinforce the validation, and this gives me more identity and meaning. And then now you're like really out of balance, and maybe your identity becomes associated with that for some time. Correct?
It did. It became me, because at the time I didn't know who me was. Me was gone by the time I was 10. Who I should have been was stripped from me. And all during that time, I just, I figured this is who I am, I can get the attention and affections of any man as long as I am sexual towards them, and I thought that's who the true me was, and that's so sad and sick, but that's how I felt, that the more sexual I was, the more I understood who I was, and I didn't understand that. I mean, looking back on it now, God, I was so misguided. Lost is a good word.
Okay,
Very
so
lost.
yeah, I'm sure. you had no positive role models in your life that you could contrast a very
Yeah.
meaningful, high quality connection again. Now, here, I'm going to get a little more personal. When your identity is being formed with that hyper sexual arousal identity, right? And how you get
Yeah.
validation. Were you actually able to experience pleasure in sex, like have an orgasm, or this was all a people pleasing thing that is a mental validation? Were you actually was it pleasurable to you?
50% of the time it was. The other 50% of the time, I just mainly did it because I had a male figure right there with me, giving me validation for a little while, you know? So half the time, yes, I did. But the other half, I didn't because I was still, I felt like this reminds me of something, but I can't pinpoint my finger on it. You know, it made me very uncomfortable. And I could not, for the life of me at that time, pinpoint why I felt uncomfortable. You know, it could have been what was going on, reminding me of something my father did, and I just couldn't remember, which I still don't. But I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that the 50% that I didn't orgasm was due to the fact that it reminded me of something my father did to me.
Yeah, there was no emotional connection in some of those experiences. Now,
Yes.
from some of the things I've noticed again in observations and environments I've been in, is that the emotional connection would actually scare the people sometimes because they're not familiar with it. Like just having a sex based connection that's just more hedonistic pleasure, root chakra, that was one thing. But if you started to try to elevate it to more predominantly love, there would be a shutdown because they don't know how to process. When I say they, I'm talking about just the collective they that maybe have experienced childhood trauma, sexual abuse. It might be foreign to them and scare them, and they run off. Did you experience anything like that?
I did with quite a few boyfriends, you know, that they didn't know how to handle me, you know, because they said your personality is going up and down. You know, one minute you're this way, another minute you're next, and then you're back this way, and you were flip flopping, and they didn't know what to do with that. You know, I did flip flop a lot for many years because I was busy trying to adjust myself to them. You know, I was trying to figure out how to adjust myself to them, and I didn't, you know, I just couldn't get it right, you know, because it was all about making sure that I didn't lose them. You know, I didn't experience loss one more time. So I would do anything I had to form to their idea of who I should be. But in that process, what I was doing is I was flip flopping back and forth, you know, and in my personality. So I did lose a lot of relationships that way because I had not yet learned who I was. I did not yet learn anything. I mean, I didn't have any tools. You know, I was going off this based upon self. You know, what I thought was right, even though it was all wrong. You know, the way I was going about it. But I didn't know that back then. I didn't know it for many, many years. You know, that the way I was going about things was all completely wrong. But what did I have to learn off of? I had nobody. You know, I come from two families that everything is swept under the rug and it's the elephant in the room. Everybody knows it's there, but nobody's going to talk about it.